What do a senator, a banker, and a stake president have in common? That might sound like the start of a joke, but for John William Hart, it was his life. He was a busy and dedicated man that valued fairness for all people. When he passed away, many spoke about his undeniable impact on the state of Idaho and the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. In fact, Hiram Manwaring, president of Ricks College, said the following at his funeral.
In his passing, our state and our church have lost a dynamic power. In culture and courtesy, he could walk with kings, presidents, and rulers. In him was combined most of the elements that make men truly great. He loved his America and wanted it kept safe for the comfort and progress of its citizens. He loved his Idaho and wanted it kept fit for prosperous communities and comfortable houses. Above all, he loved his church and wanted it kept the sacred guide to right living and the final path to eternal life.
Welcome to the BYU-Idaho Roots of the Mighty Oaks podcast. I'm your host, Eden Rowe, and here we talk about the history of BYU-Idaho and how it applies to us today. The stories shared during this podcast are true, and they can help us understand and appreciate how BYU-Idaho became our beloved institution. John W. Hart was known for something rare and powerful: his genuine concern for others. It was a quality that shaped not only how he treated people, but also who he was at his core. He brought that mindset into everything he said and did, which made him a man others could trust. He wasn't just thoughtful, he was outspoken and principled, someone who led with both his heart and his head. His compassion for individuals drove many of his choices, often putting the needs of others before his own. This didn't just impact those in John's immediate circles, but his caring for others led to decisions that protected and affected all the members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints in Idaho. And sure, putting others first sometimes cost him personally, but for John, it was always worth it. The impact John Hart had on his community didn't happen overnight. It was rooted in the experiences of his childhood, which helped shape the thoughtful and adaptable man he would become. He grew up in Ogden, Utah, with a large, close-knit family and learned early on how to navigate complex situations. His father practiced plural marriage, so John was raised not only by his mother, but also by several aunties, the other wives of his father, whom he and his siblings affectionately called by that name. In his childhood, John continued to learn, grow, and develop his interest. These early experiences helped him become flexible, good with people, and able to roll with the punches. His family was constantly amazed by the qualities and skills he demonstrated from a young age. He was outgoing and had a natural ability to lead. People admired his friendly nature, athletic ability, and musical talent. One talent, in particular, stood out: his skill with the cornet, which is similar to a trumpet. His family believed he had real potential and could go far with it. It wasn't just his abilities that made John stand out. At the age of 18, John's hair turned a striking, snowy white. It was unusual, but his friends and family found it beautiful. Rather than hide it, John embraced it, and that thick white hair became one of his trademarks for the rest of his life. With his striking white hair and natural charming personality, John Hart was more than ready for the dating scene. It wasn't long before a nearby farm girl named Elizabeth Jane Hogg caught his eye. The two began spending more and more time together, and John quickly proved himself to be a true gentleman. He was so invested in their relationship that he'd ride his horse over to pick her up for choir practice, and they ride there and back together. Can you imagine being picked up for a date on horseback? As wild as it sounds today, it was one of the few ways to get around in his time. John and Elizabeth made the most of every opportunity to be together. He cared for her deeply, and even when money was tight, he found creative ways to make things work. They loved going out dancing, but when they couldn't afford the ticket price, John would show up offering produce from the farm, vegetables, eggs, and yes, even live poultry. Picture this: John arriving at the dance with a squirming chicken under his arm, all just to spend the evening dancing with his sweetheart. That's the kind of heart and dedication that defined him. John and Elizabeth married young. She was just 17 and he was 19, driven in part by John receiving a mission call. They were sealed on December 2nd, 1885 in the Logan Endowment House. Only 7 weeks after their wedding, John left to serve a mission in Florence, Tennessee. Despite the challenges, John found great joy in his missionary service. He had the opportunity to baptize several future saints and felt fulfilled in sharing the gospel. But it wasn't all peaceful. The late 1800s were a tense time for missionaries in the southern states. Mobs were common, and missionaries were often targets of hostility. John and his companions faced several of these angry groups during their service, but they remained steady and focused, determined to find those ready to hear their message. In June of 1887, John was released and returned home, doing his best to make up for the time he and Elizabeth had spent apart. For their wedding anniversary, he gave her an organ and quickly built them a small brick house. Believing that farming would be the best way to support his family, John, Elizabeth, and their children all worked together to earn a living. They lived on their farm in West Weber, Utah for 7 years, during which they formed many close friendships. They stayed in touch with many of these friends, even after some moved away. A number of them settled in Idaho and spoke so highly of their new home that John and Elizabeth were eventually inspired to move their family there and begin a new chapter in Idaho. They settled for a while in Manan, Idaho, which is close to Rigby. There, John was engaged in work on the farm as well as within the church. In 1899, he was called to serve as the bishop for the Manan ward. He accepted and spent his time helping those around him in his ward for 10 years. Because he was always helping others, he had to rely on his family to take care of the farm. His farm found much success in 1900. One of the largest farming and livestock companies in the West hired John to become an executive. While working at the Woods Livestock Company, he spent time going to other farms and inspecting and improving those properties. It was a great way for him to become even more involved in his ever-growing community. He and his family embraced other interests and jobs to help grow the community, and luckily, the success he was having from Woods Livestock helped pay for it. One of those experiences involved moving away from Manan and selling their farm. The Harts decided to officially move to Rigby, and there John decided to take a bold adventure into banking. John's time also as bishop and as a livestock company executive allowed him to really get to know his Rigby community. He and other local leaders bought what became known as the First National Bank of Rigby, and under John's leadership, the bank initially thrived. But unfortunately, due to the aftermath of World War I, banks all over America began to fail. One of those banks that struggled was a local bank in a nearby town. The logical next step as a business competitor would be to let the bank fail, but John decided to absorb the bank, not for profits, but to shield ordinary people who he cared about from losing their life savings. When the final failing competitor bank in Rigby came to him pleading for help, John once again took it on. Many people advised against this, but for John, he didn't care if it would be financially unwise. He said regarding the matter that it is our moral duty to take it over and avert disaster to the community. He and his bankers kept the bank alive as long as possible, but in 1923, the weight of those rescues finally became too much. John had to make the painful but principled decision to close his bank. The losses were great for him. In order to pay off others for his decision, he lost his farms, his savings, and the work of a lifetime. But he kept his head up and his integrity in the process. No wrongdoing was ever found, and he had the respect of a whole community because of his actions to care for others. John continued to wear many hats as he helped his community keep running and thriving. He was involved in different ways with automobiles, the pharmacy, dairy production, meat packaging, and the local hospital, and of course, his various church callings. But one particular remarkable story that highlights his concern and love for others took place during his time as the state senator. During John Hart's political career, he advocated for equal rights, particularly for members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. At one point, another senator introduced a hostile bill aimed at defranchising the saints. This bill sought to strip members of the church of their right to vote. Senator John Hart stood his ground. He defended his faith and his belief in the American dream. Thanks to his efforts and those who supported him, the Saints retained their voting rights. John Hart served in the Idaho legislature for 14 years. 1 term in the House, and 6 terms in the Senate. One of his notable accomplishments in government was supporting a bill that divided Fremont County into 2 new counties. On February 18, 1913, Hart presented the bill to Governor Haynes, who signed it at the Boise State Capitol. As a result, 2 new counties were created, Jefferson County and Madison County. Rexburg and BYU-Idaho are part of Madison County, so in a way, John Hart helped define the very area we're all very familiar with. John's connection to BYU-Idaho didn't end there. He also served on the school board for our institution for many years. This likely contributed to why a building was eventually named in his honor. But not just any building, the Hart Building, home to the fitness center and the wellness center where students work and teach one another. This feels fitting, as John Hart enjoyed many various sports and physical activities. John Hart truly did his best to listen to others and to show concern and support for his community. He saw people as individuals worth of being heard and respected. I admire his generosity and his willingness to always consider what was best for those around him. When we show love and concern for one another, we're reminded of the value of each individual and how important it is to treat others the way we all deserve to be treated. Thank you for listening to the Roots of the Mighty Oaks podcast. This episode has been produced and read by BYU-Idaho communication student Eden Rowe.